Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and we've got an interesting new but old topic to get to today because we're finally maybe going to get international games in America. It's never happened before, excluding the International Champions Cup and the Club World Cup and the Copa America, sort of. But now La Liga is involved, and that changes everything, Graham Ruthven.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. Yeah, do you have a deal with Relevant Sports? Feels like everyone does.
I feel like I'm the only one who doesn't at this point. So I got to pull some strings, make some things happen to be able to record the podcast in, I don't know, Minnesota or Kansas City. I think that's how it works.
Well, I've got to deal with Irrelevant Sports. I've been irrelevant for most of my life. So that
Did you write that one down, or was that an on-the-fly joke?
No, it was on the fly.
Okay, all right. Then I can excuse it a little more than I would otherwise. But Graham, we are talking about domestic league games being played in a non-domestic setting, a topic that has come up at various points in soccer history. We'll go through a few of those. But for the purposes of the topic of today, why are we discussing this, Graham?
Yeah, so as you say, Taylor, this story surfaces every so often, but it is in the news specifically as we're recording in August 2025 because the Spanish Federation, the RFEF, has approved plans for a La Liga match between Villarreal and Barcelona to be played in Miami. So that match was originally slated to be played at the Ceramica. I still call it the Madrigal on December 21st. Now the plan is to play it. Now hopefully it's not being played at the Madrigal. I've seen what happens to that house. With the floor shifting and everything. The plan is to play it at Hard Rock Stadium. Presumably, I would presume around that date, so like before Christmas time. And this is significant because until now, the RFEF, the Spanish Federation, they'd been opposed to the idea of playing a league match abroad. They opposed a plan to play a Barcelona-Atletico Madrid match in Miami last year. There was also a plan for a Girona-Barcelona match to be played once again in Miami 6 years ago. And each time it has followed the same pattern where the clubs involved are in favour, especially Barcelona, who need those levers to be pulled. But it would fall at the hurdle of receiving approval from the Federation. And now that hurdle has been cleared, and it feels like some other hurdles are set to be cleared as well.
Do you get a sense of why the Spanish Federation decided to kind of reverse their opinion?
I think Javier Tebas, who is the La Liga chief, is having more and more influence on Spanish football in general. And of course, with the Rubiales scandal and him being forced out of the federation, rightfully so, it feels like there's a bit of a leadership vacuum at the top of the RFEF. And so Tebas has essentially become the figurehead of Spanish soccer right now. And kind of against his identity, against the grain of what Tebas stands for and a lot of other things. Like, he was one of the most vocal opponents of the Super League, but yet he's always been in favour of this plan and for Spanish teams to play matches, particularly in Miami, because of the relationship with Relevant Sports, which is relevant, no pun intended, to this entire story. That's why this thing is happening.
It also feels like it's an opportunity to kind of seize ground that will eventually be seized. It's sort of like, why go to the moon? Because somebody's going to go there, so why not be the first? It does seem like with the relevant lawsuit, which we're going to talk about in a bit, the door is as open as it has ever been. I think Serie A has expressed interest in playing games in the United States. You would assume the Premier League will investigate how to make that happen. Maybe the Bundesliga will be the lone holdout there of the big four leagues, but it feels like it is an inevitable thing because you want to reach that American audience. You want the kind of broadcast revenue. You want the match day revenue. And I think you want to kind of stake that claim as being the league that did it first and did it most often and thus has that existing connection. So it makes sense if you are La Liga and the Spanish Federation, if you want to kind of get more money, gain more of a footprint around the world, and maybe if not go the Super League route, go we are going to be the dominant league in a number of different countries, not just by having people tune in, but by people showing up to an actual league game.
Yeah, La Liga and Serie A in particular, they're pushing this hard because if you are not the Premier League, if you're not the Premier League in Europe, you're nowhere at the moment. The other big five European leagues have fallen a long way behind, and so they need to find new areas to make up the ground, and this is where they have landed. It feels like the Premier League will be a bit more conservative than some of the other leagues when it actually comes through to comes to going through with plans for games abroad. But if La Liga and Serie A can do it this year, I think they will get a head start. That's what they're looking at. They can make up some ground there. And Serie A, they are a long way along with their own plans to not play games in the US, although I'm sure that is in the pipeline at some point in the future. But they are in a similar situation with playing a game in Perth later this year. So it's slightly different in that the San Siro is being used for the Winter Olympic Games later this year. AC Milan have a home game against Como, which they don't have a stadium for. So the plan is to play that game in Perth, Australia, and they have, like La Liga, they've received the approval from the federation, and so they are at the same stage of the process as La Liga, where essentially what La Liga is now doing is they're applying to, or they have requested the federation to apply to UEFA to then go to FIFA to allow this all to happen. Those are the hurdles that have yet to be cleared. And the other hurdle that has been cleared is relating to Relevant Sports, who, for anyone who doesn't know, they're a sports rights company headed up by Stephen Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins. As I mentioned earlier, they have the competition rights for La Liga in the United States, so that's why these games are always slated to be played at Hard Rock Stadium, because Stephen Ross owns it. And Relevant, they are hugely influential in American soccer. They used to run the International Champions Cup every summer. They've also recently landed the US rights for the Champions League, which, by the way, will absolutely be the next push to have a Champions League final in the US. That is coming down the pipeline. But basically, two things have happened with Relevant. They removed FIFA from their lawsuit to try and force them to allow league games to be played abroad. There was some sort of settlement between the two of them there. And then there was also a settlement between Relevant and US Soccer, who had previously opposed the idea, and now US Soccer has said they will not stand in the way of this happening. So it feels like one by one, Relevant, just through being supremely influential and having these deals like UEFA, are they going to stand in the way of this happening? If the competition rights for the US are held by Relevant, like there's a partnership there already. They have a partnership with US Soccer as well. So yeah, it feels like this is more likely to happen than not at this stage.
You've covered a lot of ground there very well. To go back over a little bit of it, to my understanding, the lawsuit itself relates to a previous attempt where it was Girona and Barcelona. Forgive me if you already said that one. That was going to be played in Miami. U.S. Soccer and FIFA blocked that one. Relevant sues U.S. Soccer in 2019 for violating antitrust rules. And from what I understand of antitrust rules and the lawsuit itself, like, they are more or less correct that, like, there was a deliberate attempt to block competition from happening by like a governing body that doesn't have a competitor, because that's how it works. But as a result, it felt like there was there weren't any strict rules in place, and so it was just kind of like an agreement that then when you're going to kind of take it to court, suddenly that agreement falls apart, and it ends up with the settlement with U.S. Soccer and by default FIFA that now clears the way a little bit. I also think, to my understanding, part of this is also that the NFL playing games around the world sort of makes the point that, like, this has happened before going the other way. So now we're saying it can't happen here, but it can happen elsewhere. And that to me is a valid point. I don't love NFL games played in London or Mexico or Germany. Not that I have any antipathy towards those countries. It just, like, you take away a home game from a fan base that would like it. I get the idea that they can then travel or whatever, but it does feel like you're changing a little bit of the tradition. But if you've already done that, and that's the existing sort of practice with other leagues, then why not allow it to go in reverse? And so here we are with the door now open, or at least, as I said, more open than it's been. Still some hurdles to go. Doesn't seem like UEFA and FIFA are going to be fully opposed, but we also have individual clubs who are very opposed to this one. Real Madrid have petitioned to block the move. I'm a little less clear on why they are opposed, aside from they're not the ones who are going to be involved right away.
Barca who are playing the game.
And I do wonder if, like, because that was going to be it was Villarreal, right? Was that going to be Barcelona at home or Villarreal at home?
Villarreal at home.
So
in December, yeah.
To your point, the Madrigal. So, like, I wonder if that's an element of it, that you would assume that Villarreal at home is going to be a more difficult atmosphere for Barcelona than going on the road to a stadium where you would assume it will be 90% Barcelona supporters. So if you're Real Madrid, maybe you don't want them gaining an extra home game. Maybe that is an argument for why you stand in the way. All that to say, there are hurdles still to be cleared. This is not a foregone conclusion. but it does feel to me like sooner rather than later we will have La Liga games played in the U.S.
Yeah, and even things like having the Club World Cup in the US, I think, has opened eyes to the commercial potential of hosting competitive games in the US. It was Gianni Infantino who came out afterwards and said that tournament, for all its flaws and faults, and look, maybe this is a little bit gross as well, but each game at that tournament was worth $33 million, which smashed all kinds of records. Like, there's nothing that comes even close to that. And obviously what's folded into that is the $1 billion DAZN deal. So I'm not saying that Villarreal and Barcelona playing a game in Miami in December would be worth $33 million, but I think teams are looking at the biggest consumer market in the world, which is the United States. I think it's underplayed how much wealthier on average the American middle class is than a lot of European countries and in the UK as well. And so that's a factor. These teams play abroad. They shift a bunch of merch. They get on TV shows. It's a big opportunity for them to gain new fans. And so it's never been more attractive than it is now. And we've had some test events, as I say, Club World Cup. Even things like the Copa Libertadores final, the infamous one that was called off in Buenos Aires, the Superclásico final. And they ended up playing that second leg in Madrid for reasons unknown, other than just to make some money and to make some coin. So there have been these games that have broken down barriers, and eventually I think the floodgates will open.
I hear you on the middle class, the amount of money in the United States. One interesting, personal anecdote. I was talking to a buddy of mine last night, actually, while we were playing pickup, who is Brazilian. He's a flamenco supporter, like a diehard flamenco supporter. He has a flamenco tattoo, and I hadn't seen him since last season, the end of last season in the spring. And in the meantime, he went and saw Flamengo play in Philly for the Club World Cup, and then he went and saw them lose to Bayern Munich in Miami. And not trying to put his business in the street, he is not a rich fellow by any stretch of the imagination, but he was basically saying, I'm not going to go back to Brazil to watch them. I don't have many opportunities to get to see them. So when they're here, I'm going to spend that money to make it happen. And I think it speaks to there is always going to be massive appeal from many different audiences and many different demographics to go see competitive soccer played between some of the best teams in the world. And when you're getting La Liga here, that interest is going to be that much higher.
Yeah, and the US with its expat communities and immigrant communities is always going to be appealing for those games. I mean, we saw in the Club World Cup the Boca games and the River games, particularly the ones played in Miami, played in Florida, were electric and drew huge crowds. So it's another reason why the US in particular. I mean, there is scope for these games to be taken to Asia as well, to Singapore, to China, Japan, and obviously I've mentioned Serie A wants to play in Australia. So there are the other markets, and I think South America itself would be attractive to a lot of teams. I'm thinking maybe the Portuguese teams, if they were ever to do that, that would be an attractive market for them. But the US is seen by a lot of clubs and leagues right now as sort of the golden goose, the cash cow.
And so it has been La Liga or La Liga clubs and relevant trying to kind of test the waters, push this into actually happening. But we've had other sort of ways of making it happen, like the ICC, like the Club World Cup. But Graham, there have been other attempts going even further back. Let's talk about the preposterous 39th game, shall we?
Yes.
A thing that has never made sense to me. And even in the explainers for it, everybody kind of leaves out the one key part of why this was an especially stupid idea.
The fact that it's the 39th game.
Yes. if you're just gonna move a La Liga game that was gonna happen anyway, it sucks if you were a Villarreal or Girona or whomever it might be who loses that home game. But it's a game that was going to happen anyway. When you're adding an extra game that completely unbalances a balanced schedule and gives massive advantage and another opportunity to teams that might need those 3 points or might desperately need to not lose those 3 points, it just immediately doesn't make sense to me. And then you're just doing it for commercial reasons kind of compounds the issue a bit.
Yeah, I mean, remember that title race in the Premier League, was it maybe 3 seasons ago when Liverpool and Man City had those record point tallies and it went down to the final day and there was basically nothing between them. Imagine
Oopsies,
that
one
happened.
more game.
Yeah, one more game. And not only that, Liverpool, you have Chelsea and Man City, you've got Burnley in the 39th game to decide that, it just warps the entire competition.
Yeah. And Liverpool, you're playing yours in Los Angeles, so enjoy that flight. And City, you're playing yours in Brussels. It's just So many opportunities for that to be a terrible idea and go so wrong in so many different ways. Never really made sense, but was an idea that maybe we can add a game and then we're not taking anything away from anybody and everybody will be happy. And it turns out nobody was happy with that one.
Yeah, and this would have been introduced for the 2010-2011 season. So as we've kind of referenced, the idea was that there'd be a 39th game. There's 38 games, if listeners don't know that, in a standard Premier League season. There'd be an extra round of games. They would kind of, I presume, just like randomly draw teams out of a hat to face each other. Or maybe it would be even more cynical than that. Maybe they would want a Manchester derby in New York or whatever to market. They never got that far. But the idea was that you would have had a round of games, and each game would have been played in a different location around the world. So maybe you would have Man United versus Arsenal in Miami, or Chelsea v West Ham in Singapore, or I don't know, Bournemouth v Burnley in Rio. Rio got the real headliner there. But yeah, this would have been introduced for 10-11 season. Yeah. It was surprisingly endorsed by a lot of people. It was endorsed by several Premier League chairmen. It was endorsed by like these people
who had literal dollars in their eyes when they were talking about why they thought this would be a good idea.
Yeah, I think David Gold was at the Birmingham City chairman at the time, was very much in favour of it. But even it was surprising how much support it got from like soccer people. So Arsene Wenger was in favour of it. Alex Ferguson I wouldn't say he was in favour of it, but the article that I read said that he didn't oppose it. He was open to the idea. Roy Keane was apparently in favour of it. US Soccer didn't oppose it. MLS came out in favour of it and said this was a good idea. So and if it had been just purely up to the Premier League clubs and the Premier League stakeholders, this might have happened, as flawed as a concept as it was. But Sepp Blatter and FIFA, they certainly opposed it. And at the time, England was bidding for the 2018 World Cup. Blatter came out and said this may, almost like a threat, said this may affect England's chances of winning that tournament, of getting that tournament. In the end, other things in brown envelopes, of course, affected that bid. And what happened then was that the FA, they withdrew their support for it because they didn't want to get on the wrong side of FIFA. They didn't want to lose that World Cup bid. So I'm not sure it was ever a good idea. There were obviously core concerns about the concept. But yeah, this came closer than I remembered. Doing this research, obviously it's something I remember vividly, the 39th game proposal. It's seared into my memory. But there was a lot more support for it than I maybe remember at the time.
I am certainly not a lover of FIFA, and definitely not a lover of Sepp Blatter. But I want to be clear, like, I don't think this is just my bias when I say, Graham, that opposition was, though they would have said it's out of, like, you know, preserving tradition and domestic games should happen domestically. Am I correct in assuming that opposition was FIFA not wanting to lose control and the idea that domestic leagues now being able to be played, or games being played around the world, sort of cuts into FIFA's whole like breadbasket of we're the ones who control international soccer, not you guys. Don't overstep.
Yeah, it was all political, and the interesting thing about that now is Infantino is coming at that same political situation, landscape, from the other side now, where he wants to have more control over the club game, hence the expansion of the Club World Cup, hence why that happened this summer with 32 teams. And now he is looking at these games abroad and even things like cross-border leagues as well, for FIFA to endorse those leagues, to get their claws into those leagues and have more influence over UEFA in that sense as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on politically at the top of world soccer at the moment. There's a real period of change.
Do you agree that of like the top 5 European leagues, the Bundesliga would be the one that probably holds out the longest?
I don't think the Bundesliga will ever do it. I think most leagues will do it. I even think like the Scottish Premiership will have eventually, it might be 10 years from now, but Celtic will play a game in Boston or something like that. I just think with the Bundesliga and the 50+1 and the way that league is structured, I just don't think it'll ever happen for them.
I think the Bundesliga never would, or at the very least would be the very last one to do so. I think the Premier League would be one of the last ones to do so for very different reasons. I think, as we saw with the Super League, fan opposition can be enough to kind of stop things from happening, stop these types of developments from occurring. And I think that would be a strong part of it. I think there would be huge opposition to moving home games away from their local stadia to one around the world. But I also think the Premier League doesn't need it as much as other leagues do. It's why the FA Cup is still played at Wembley and not in Saudi Arabia, as other domestic cup competitions end up being played. I think the Premier League has so much money right now from the TV deal, from ownership. They maybe don't need it as much as other leagues. Other leagues have to find ways to try to stay competitive, to try to get that foothold. And I think only once other leagues started to make up ground would the Premier League really start to force the issue.
Yeah, they would only do that if they felt their position was being threatened in any way. There's no need for the Premier League to take risks, which is why they continue to, here in the UK, they re-up their TV rights deal with Sky every 4 years because, hey, it's working for them now. And they test things, like they had that kind of Netflix style app in Singapore, and they had the deal here with Amazon Prime. But ultimately, they are a very conservative small C soccer league, and so I totally agree. I think they'll be one of the last to do this, but ultimately, I do think they will do it. I think they'll see the money on offer, particularly for Premier League teams. Like the attraction with Villarreal playing Barcelona in Miami is, let's be honest about this, Barcelona. There's not much on the Villarreal side of things. That equation is entirely different for the Premier League, where even a team, even an Aston Villa or a West Ham or you could go down the table in the Premier League. It feels like there are supporter sections in the US that would kind of lap that thing up.
And truly, I think even like, what was the one you said was going to be happening in Rio? Was it Burnley?
What did I say? Bournemouth or something?
Yeah.
Or Brighton?
Like, even that, I think, in the right market, sells out and gets a huge attendance bump. Because we've had, like here in Richmond, we'll have La Liga teams and Premier League teams, or like kind of yo-yo Premier League teams, come here for preseason and play the kickers or play friendlies at City Stadium. And those are always super well attended because it's a Premier League team. It's a La Liga team. Everybody wants to see it. So even if it's Burnley Bournemouth, I still think put it in the right market that feels undeserved. If you put underserved, that is, if you put it in like Nashville, Burnley and Bournemouth, I bet that sells out. And I bet you get a ton of people there because there's going to be interest, but there's also going to be fans that travel. And I think you end up making a ton of money.
Because the Premier League itself is a brand in the way that other leagues aren't. Like, La Liga's trying its best. Like, the Liga's trying, and Serie A as well is trying to position itself as a brand in the same way, but they haven't been as successful.
Yeah.
When people talk about those leagues, they talk about the teams in those leagues, whereas the Premier League feels like the NFL. Like, the NFL, I'm not a massive NFL fan, but my impression of the London games is that it's not often the best teams. In fact, it's often the crappiest teams that get sent to London.
It never is the best teams.
Exactly.
I always feel bad for London.
But those games sell out and are always a big deal because they are an NFL game. And it's the same with the Premier League as well. I think they have the same brand value.
Those games, especially because of the time difference, so they're always playing at like what would be 9 a.m. on the East Coast or whatever. They're always like 6-3 heading into the fourth quarter, and I feel so bad for the people who shelled out a ton of money to go see them. I mean, there's also with the Premier League, there's the obviously like the English language commonality that probably makes it a little bit easier. But you're totally right that like people should want to go see Osasuna Real Betis play in the United States, but I think you're going to get lower attendance for that one than you would for Burnley Bournemouth, and I think the same applies to the majority of Serie A as well, unless they're all playing in like I don't know, like predominantly Italian areas, if those still exist in the US. Who knows?
Let's get Stirling Albion on tour. We'll give up one of our games. Fun fact, Taylor, Stirling Albion were the first British team to play a game in Asia, which sounds like a fake fact. It is not. 1966 is one of the most famous. It's the most famous thing that happened in 1966, actually. But one of the most famous things about we played a pre-season game in Japan in 1966, and that was the first time.
How? Why?
I think someone pulled out. I think the story is there was another team, a more illustrious team, and they couldn't go, and so we got invited, and we were the first team to play in Asia, which is ridiculous, but it's true.
I don't know enough about airline travel in the 60s, but I'm just picturing the Indiana Jones montage of like having to fly from city to city to go from Scotland to Japan. I'm guessing was at least a couple connecting flights.
Yeah, I don't fancy that much, to be honest, in the 60s, but
no.
Did it.
So the final question then, Graham, would this be a good thing or a bad thing from the American soccer perspective? Because it's going to generate interest. You're going to get people showing up to games. The question is, does that then translate to more people playing soccer, more people watching soccer, more people going to domestic soccer games, or is it a sort of one-off, almost like when a band comes to town? You see them, they leave, and then you go on with your life. It's not like you're then going to support local bands because you saw the one band come in.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. You might have a better insight being on the ground than me on this. I lean towards the latter. There was maybe a time like 20 years ago when this sort of thing maybe would have moved the needle in a meaningful way. But there's just so much soccer now that happens in the US that I don't know if this moves the needle more than the Club World Cup being in the US. I mean, these teams are already going to the US every summer to play preseason games. I also don't think this would diminish the desire for fans to experience the real thing, right? Like when I went to a Classico, I wanted to experience it at the Bernabeu. When I went to Manchester Derby, I wanted to experience it in Manchester, not at MetLife Stadium. And so I don't think this is the sort of thing where these games happen in the US and all of a sudden you don't get US fans going to Premier League games in person. You don't get them going to Classicos at the Camp Nou or at the Bernabeu. So, yeah, I don't know how much it would actually change. I think this is purely, from the other side of things, it's a way to make money for these clubs, and these clubs with PSR and FFP and particularly the non-Premier League teams with the lower revenues, TV rights revenue that they're getting. They need to make more money, and it's a way to capitalise on that American market.
Obviously, like a USL League One team is not going to be able to compete on the technical side with a La Liga team or a Serie A team or a Premier League team. So I think like in terms of the quality, it's going to be a sizable step down and a hard sell there. I think with atmosphere, you could probably still get some people. If you go to a La Liga game where there's a pretty good atmosphere, and if you then want to experience that again, I do think a lot of MLS teams, especially the teams that are good, are going to give you a very good atmosphere that maybe will kind of keep you going back. But even, again, the USL League One, the Richmond Kickers here, like that is part of my selling point for people who've never been, is like, yeah, go to a soccer game. It's not kind of what you're used to from a traditional sports perspective of there's music and cheerleaders and a ton of stoppages in play where you're kind of like looking for things to do. The game is ongoing. You can get into the kind of chanting and the singing and the flares going off. You can watch the game. I don't know, you can go get a beer. But like, I think the atmosphere is always going to be a good selling point to pull people in. And I think that is a kind of consistent thing across American soccer. A growing thing, certainly not to the level of an Old Firm derby or anything like that. I'm not sure we want to get to that level. But I think it is still the one way that maybe you could continue to pull people in, and there could be some transfer of viewership of fandom from an exhibition but regular season game from La Liga to watching a domestic game.
In a broad sense, I agree with you. I think a soccer game, just by its nature, is a different sort of atmosphere to a lot of the kind of more traditional American sports. Having been to baseball, have I been to all of them? Baseball, yes, I have been to all of them. So I've got some first-hand experience there. Where I think it will be difficult is...
You went to an NFL game?
I did.
Jets?
I've been to Jets game. Yeah,
Jesus, cram.
Yeah. I really went in. That was
a glutton for punishment, man.
Yeah, that's a great entry point for me.
Wait, hold on. Now I have to know. So you saw the Jets play American football. Who did you see play basketball?
The Knicks and the Orlando Magic are the two teams that I've seen play basketball.
What about baseball?
The Yankees and the Blue Rays. I know a Canadian team, but still.
Blue Jays?
Blue Jays.
I believe you combine Blue Jays and Devil Rays, who are now the Rays, I think.
What's the Tampa team? They're a Rays team, aren't they?
They're the Rays. They were the Devil Rays,
that's
now
probably,
they're the Rays.
Right, okay, that's what I'm getting mixed up. Yeah, I've not been to a Rays game. And
then
really,
I guess it depends on the year you saw the Knicks and the Yankees, because they could both be very fun and they could both be absolute trash.
It was at the time where Carmelo was fun and good for the Knicks.
All right.
So it was relatively decent. And then I have actually had a good introduction to NHL. I went to a Bruins, I've told the story before, a Bruins-Rangers game at Madison Square Garden, and didn't really... This is very unlike me as well. I have no idea why I didn't actually check the fixture. I guess I was just more up for like the experience of seeing a hockey game at Madison Square Garden, but didn't know who it was until I got to Madison Square Garden. I was like, why is there so much police? Why does everyone seem on edge? And I was like, oh right, yeah, the biggest rivalry in American ice hockey. So yeah, those are my experiences. But the point
You went to the Rodney Dangerfield joke of, I went to a fight the other night and a hockey game broke out.
Yeah. It was good fun. I enjoyed it. It was probably the closest atmosphere to a Scottish soccer match. Like, a lot of people seemed very angry, so I enjoyed that element of it. But on the point of atmospheres at these hypothetical at this point La Liga games in Miami, it feels like they could be a little bit flat if you're not transplanting the actual fans from Villarreal and Barcelona, right? Because I remember you made this point on our Premier League previews about Everton playing in their new stadium and people not knowing where they
are.
Yeah. And so, like,
Yeah.
just even if you transplant those fans and then you mix in some American-based fans, like, it feels like you might not fully get the proper experience of one of those of those games. So even there, it feels like it's a little bit watered down. It's a little bit like you just want the real thing. I think essentially is ultimately where it lands.
That is such a weird like little detail, but you're totally right, because I then also extend it to like the Arsenal supporters group here in Richmond, like has songs and had songs last I was in a bar with them for different players, but they were all, some of which are the kind of traditional songs that you'd hear in England, but a lot of, like, I'm guessing supporters over there weren't singing Olivier Giroud's name to the beat of Bismarck's like like, oh baby, you got what I need. That one, like they were doing. And I feel like you would get these weird American-centric songs and chants for players that would be sort of discombobulating if you were used to a different type of sound from a different game. So, all right, now I'm kind of into it. Now I'm kind of into it for the weird impact it would have on chants and singing and flags and the like. But overall, it feels like a thing that will happen sooner rather than later, and then it also feels like a thing that once it happens once will happen more and more frequently.
And Taylor, how do you, just not looking solely from the American soccer point of view, taking like a big picture look at things, how does that make you feel? How do you feel about that? Just about league games in general being played in foreign lands away from their like native fans.
I don't really like it, to be honest, and it doesn't really change anything for me one way or the other, because it's not like I'm there in person. It's not like I'm now not going to be at a stadium that I was at. It's going to be watching it on television. It's just a different viewing experience of sort. But I think when it becomes a common thing, it's like the Basketball, the opening of Basketball, a movie that Ryan and I quote way too often. It has the line about, like, when the novelty of baseball wore off, they tried interleague play. When that novelty wore off, they tried intersport play. And in that scene, it's an outfielder trying to make a catch, and then he just gets crushed by a linebacker from American football. Like, it kind of feels like that. It's like once you start to kind of have games played all over the place, and now you're adding a game, or you're taking away a game, or it all blends together a little bit more, and I think we lose even more of the like identity of those leagues and of those domestic competitions that I do think was such an interesting aspect of soccer. And I think it's faded already, but there was that time when it was like the Premier League is the most passionate, Italian is the most tactical, and Spanish is the most technical. And I think we've gone away from that because I think it's all kind of a blend. But I think once you start playing games all over the world, once you start playing cup finals all over the world, it just becomes a thing that happens, and you never quite know where your team is playing or who's playing where, and it just kind of gets blended all together. It loses some of that distinct flavor that I enjoy from global soccer.
Yeah, I think the only way I would look, I'm more open to this idea than maybe some people might think. Part of that is probably because I've just been ground down by modern football, and I just feel like it's an inevitability at this point. Or it could be just I don't care because these clubs are so far away from my club that it feels like just an alien concept to me, like Stirling Albion. I don't think we're getting invited back to Japan anytime soon. I'd hope there'd be safeguards in place that it would just be once a season, or it'd be like a handful of games over, maybe like 3 games over 5 years or something like that. My main concern actually would be over the warping of the schedule, because even though La Liga's not doing the 39th game, having Villarreal play a home game in Miami is, it's more of an advantage to Barcelona, who don't have to go to the Ceramica to play Villarreal, where they'd have an advantage. So if Barcelona end up winning that title on goal difference or by a point or whatever, then I don't love that. But as someone who indulges in some MLS watching, I've like given up that fight as well, and it feels like the Champions League is now warped with the league phase schedule, and so just feels like soccer is heading in this direction. Yeah. So it's inevitable, I think.
I can't wait for the 2030 World Cup, which features 72 different national teams, while at the same time the expanded Club World Cup is going on, while we have domestic teams playing all over the world. It's going to be great. Soccer definitely needs to keep expanding and shouldn't slow down at all. But in the meantime, Graham, I've enjoyed this conversation, even if it has made me slightly more stressed than I was before we started recording. I look forward to seeing you for Stirling Albion's game in Korea, if not Japan.
Followed by Bournemouth, Burnley, and Rio, I think, is the doubleheader. That's the real Sickles double
rack up those those miles. make sure we use them accordingly. But Graham Ruthven, thank you for your time today, my friend. I have enjoyed it.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell.
Listeners, thank you as always for listening and supporting the show. We greatly appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.